Somewhere in a WeWork office, sometime before the fall, a young employee sat across a desk and was offered a choice. They could take the full salary the market would pay them, or they could take a little less in cash and make up the difference in stock, in a piece of the company itself. And the company had a word for that piece. It called it shared ownership. It printed the phrase on the walls, said it from the stage, built a whole culture on it. We are not employees and a boss. We are owners, together, in something that is going to change the world. So the employee took less money and more of the dream, because the dream was worth, on paper, $47 billion, and their slice of it, on paper, was worth more than they had ever had. Hold on to that person, because when this is over, the man at the top of that company will walk away with as much as $1.7 billion, and that employee's shared ownership will be worth exactly zero. This is the story of how those two numbers came from the same company. WeWork started in 2010 as a genuinely simple idea. Adam Neumann and a co-founder took out long leases on office buildings, spent money making them beautiful, exposed brick, glass walls, free beer on tap, neon signs that said things like, "Do what you love," and then rented out the desks and offices inside, short-term to freelancers and startups, and eventually, big companies. That is the entire business. Sign a long lease, cut it into small pieces, rent the pieces for more than the whole. It is, in a word, being a landlord. A good landlord, a stylish landlord, but a landlord, the oldest business there is. And if WeWork had called itself that, it would have been valued the way landlords are valued. On the rent, it collected minus the rent it owed. But Adam Neumann did not want to run a real estate company. He wanted to run a religion. So he told a different story. WeWork, he said, was not in the business of renting desks. It was a technology platform. It was a community. Its mission, he announced with a straight face, was to elevate the world's consciousness. He talked about WeWork schools, WeWork housing, a WeWork that would reshape how human beings lived and worked and belonged. And in Silicon Valley in the 2010s, that was exactly the right story to tell, because there was an ocean of money looking for the next thing that would change the world, and a company that merely rents offices is boring, but a company that will elevate the world's consciousness is priceless. The story did what stories do. It attracted a believer with a checkbook the size of an ocean. That believer was SoftBank, the Japanese investment giant, and its founder handed WeWork billions of dollars, and more importantly, handed it a number. By early 2019, SoftBank's money had marked WeWork at a valuation of $47 billion, which made it one of the most valuable private companies on Earth, worth more than airlines, more than car makers, more than businesses that actually turned a profit. WeWork did not turn a profit. It lost money, enormous amounts of it, roughly $1 for nearly every dollar it took in, because that is what happens when you sign expensive long leases and rent the space back out in a hurry. But the number did not care. $47 billion sat on top of the company like a crown, and everyone agreed not to look too closely at the head underneath it. And then, because crowns are worn in public, WeWork decided to sell shares to the world. To do that, it had to open its books. In August of 2019, WeWork filed the document a company must file before it goes public. Hundreds of pages laying out for the first time exactly how the business worked. And the moment the world could finally read it, the spell broke. The losses were staggering, and getting worse the more the company grew. But it was the way the company talked about money that stunned people. WeWork had invented its own measure of profit. It took its gigantic losses and began subtracting things. the usual interest and taxes first. And then it kept going, stripping out ordinary costs of running a business, marketing, administration, the money it spent to build the very spaces it rented, until the loss transformed, on the page, into something it called community-adjusted earnings. It was a number that answered the question, how much money would we make if we didn't count most of the money we spend? Wall Street had seen creative accounting before. It had never quite seen a company invent a flavor of profit and put it in a legal filing with a straight face. And the filing kept going. It turned out that Adam Neumann had, personally, bought stakes in office buildings and then leased those very buildings to WeWork so that the company he ran was paying rent to the man who ran it. It turned out that an entity he controlled had sold WeWork, the trademark, to the word we, the word, for $5.9 million, so that the company had literally paid its own founder millions for its own name. He would give that money back once it became public, but the point had landed, and the governance was built to keep him untouchable. Shares that gave his votes 10 times the weight of everyone else's, and a clause spelling out that if he died, his wife would help choose who came next. This was not a company preparing to answer to shareholders. It was a kingdom, briefly opening its gates so the public could pay to live inside. And the public, reading the fine print, recoiled. What happened next happened fast. The $47 billion valuation began to fall in public, in real time. Like a number on a screen someone was dragging down with their hand. From 47 billion to 30 to 20 to under 10, as the big investors who were supposed to buy the shares looked at the filing and said, at these terms, at any price near this, no. 6 weeks after the document appeared, the company that was going to elevate the world's consciousness could not sell its shares at a third of its supposed worth. Adam Neumann was removed as chief executive. The offering was withdrawn, and SoftBank, the believer, now had to save the thing it had inflated, pouring in billions more, taking control of roughly 80% of the company at a valuation under $8 billion. In 6 weeks, $39 billion of supposed value had simply evaporated because it had never been there. It had been a story, and the story had finally been read aloud. Now go back to the employee. When the rescue was done and the bills were tallied, the man who had built the kingdom, Adam Neumann, walked away with an exit package reported at up to $1.7 billion. Money for his shares, a consulting fee, credit to clear his personal loans. He had steered the company into a wall, and the wall paid him to leave. And it is worth being fair about why the employees had believed. They were not fools. The offices really were beautiful. The community really did feel real. The events, the friendships, the sense of building something that mattered with people you liked. The founder was magnetic in person. People who met him described walking out convinced. Belief inside WeWork was not a con someone fell for. It was the culture, the air in the building, printed on the walls and paid for in salary. Which is exactly why the ending landed the way it did. The employees got the other ending. In the months that followed, thousands were laid off. In one round alone, around 2,400 people, a quarter of the staff. And the ones who had taken less salary in exchange for shared ownership discovered where they stood in line, dead last. The preferred shareholders, SoftBank and Neumann himself, were protected. The common shareholders, the employees, were not. Their equity, the thing that had been sold to them as proof that they were owners, that they belonged, was reduced to a zero on a spreadsheet. There were no buyouts. There was no restitution. The dream had an owner, and it had not been them. WeWork itself limped on. It reached the public markets a couple of years later through a back door at a fraction of the old number. And then, in the autumn of 2023, it filed for bankruptcy. A company once valued at $47 billion, listing more debt than assets, undone by the same expensive leases that had been visible on page 1 all along. Adam Neumann did not go to prison because he had not committed a crime. Everything that gutted WeWork had been disclosed in writing, in a document anyone could read. He simply told a story so good that, for a while, the reading did not matter. Within a few years, he had started a new company in a new industry and raised hundreds of millions of dollars from a famous investor at a valuation, once again above $1 billion, betting on the same man, telling a new story. The world had not learned its lesson. It had learned his name, which is why this is not really a story about desks or even about one founder. It is about what happens when a story is allowed to be worth more than a business. When a number on a slide outruns the cash in the bank, and everyone agrees to keep clapping because the clapping is what holds the number up. We are living through another season of enormous valuations now, built on promise more than profit. And the WeWork question is the one worth keeping in your pocket. Not is the story good, but what is under the crown? Somewhere, someone is being offered a little less salary and a little more of a dream, and being told the word for it is ownership, that they belong. But the Postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.